It was the day before Christmas, in the bustling African village of Mwanzaville. The streets were alive with activity as villagers prepared for the holiday festivities. Stalls overflowed with colorful fabrics, freshly harvested yams, and homemade trinkets. Children played barefoot in the dusty streets, chasing each other with laughter that echoed through the air. 15-year-old Kendi stood at the edge of the village's only bus stop, clutching a woven bag filled with gifts for her family. She had been waiting eagerly for this day, a chance to reunite with her grandmother, who lived in the quiet lakeside town a few hours away. "Kendi, did you bring the plantains?" asked her best friend Shani, who stood beside her with a basket of ripe mangoes balanced on her hip. Kendi grinned. "Of course. Grandmother won't let me hear the end of it if I come home empty-handed." The two girls chatted, while other travelers gathered around the bus stop. There was Baba Kamau, the cheerful bus driver known for his endless stories, a young couple whispering excitedly about their upcoming wedding, a group of children, their faces smudged with dust, who couldn't stop bouncing in excitement, and a stern-looking elderly woman with a walking stick, her eyes scanning the horizon impatiently. The bus finally appeared, its familiar blue and white paint peeling but still managing to exude a sense of reliability. Baba Kamau leaned out of the window, his broad smile revealing a missing tooth. "All aboard! We're heading to Lakeside." The passengers scrambled to get on, each finding a seat among the faded cushions. Kendi and Shani found a spot near the middle, their excitement bubbling over as they settled in. The bus soon filled, its aisles packed with bags of produce, woven baskets, and even a live chicken clucking in a crate. As the bus rumbled to life, the journey began. The passengers were in high spirits, chatting, laughing, and even breaking into song. Baba Kamau, ever the storyteller, shared tales of his adventures on the road. "Once, I saw a leopard cross the road right in front of this bus," he began, his voice filled with dramatic flair. But it wasn't just any leopard. It had eyes that glowed like fire. The children gasped, their wide eyes fixed on Baba Kamau. Kendi and Shani giggled, knowing the driver's habit of exaggerating his tales. The bus rolled past golden fields and small villages where people waved as they passed. But as they approached the dense ebony forest, the mood shifted. The trees loomed tall and thick, their twisted branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. The sunlight, so bright moments ago, seemed to dim, and a cool breeze swept through the bus. "Why is it so quiet all of a sudden?" Shani whispered to Kendi, glancing around. Kendi shrugged, but even she felt the unease creeping in. The chatter among the passengers died down, replaced by an almost oppressive silence. Baba Kamau, who had been so lively earlier, now gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road. As the bus ventured deeper into the forest, strange things began to happen. The air inside grew colder, and an unnatural mist enveloped the vehicle, making it hard to see beyond the windows. The children, once so noisy, now clung to their mothers, their wide eyes filled with fear. Then, without warning, the bus jolted to a sudden stop. Everyone was thrown forward, and a few bags tumbled from the overhead racks. "What's going on?" an elderly man demanded, his voice trembling. Baba Kamau stood up, his usual confidence replaced by unease. "It's just a fallen tree blocking the road. Stay inside. I'll take care of it." He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, the doors hissing shut behind him. The passengers waited, the tension palpable. Minutes passed, but Baba Kamau didn't return. Kendi peered out of the window, but the mist was so thick that she could barely see anything. "Something's not right," she muttered. Shani nodded, clutching her basket tightly. "Maybe we should check on him." Before anyone could move, the bus engine roared to life. The passengers froze, their eyes darting to the driver's seat, only to find it empty. The doors slammed shut, and the bus began moving, its wheels crunching over the gravel road. Panic erupted inside. "Who's driving the bus?" a woman screamed, clutching her child. Candy's heart raced. She grabbed Shani's hand as the bus sped up, careening through the narrow, winding road. The trees outside seemed to close in, their twisted branches almost scraping against the windows. The passengers tried to force the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. Some shouted for help, while others clung to each other, their faces pale with fear. As the bus rounded a sharp bend, the mist parted briefly, revealing a glowing red light in the distance. The bus slowed, then stopped abruptly in front of an old, crumbling hut. The air outside was thick and heavy, carrying an eerie silence that made the hairs on Kendi's arms stand on end. The doors creaked open. No one moved. The passengers exchanged terrified glances, their breaths shallow. Then, from the direction of the hut, a deep, raspy voice echoed, "Welcome. You have been chosen." The passengers sat frozen in their seats, staring at the open door of the bus. The eerie red glow from the hut outside cast long, shifting shadows inside the vehicle. The raspy voice echoed again, louder this time, as though coming from the very walls of the forest. "Step forward, or face the consequences." A child began to cry, her mother clutching her close. The elderly woman with the walking stick stood slowly, her voice trembling, but defiant. "Who's there? Show yourself!" she demanded. No answer came. Instead, the red light grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Kendi felt her chest tighten with fear, but she also knew they couldn't stay on the bus forever. "We can't just sit here," she whispered to Shani. "Are you crazy? We don't even know what's out there," Shani hissed back, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. But before anyone could decide, the bus shuddered violently, as if unseen hands were shaking it. The lights flickered, and a deep growl echoed from the forest. Okay, we'll go," shouted a man near the front, his voice breaking. He hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the bus, his legs shaking. Slowly, others began to follow, some whispering prayers under their breath. Kendi and Shani were among the last to step off, their hearts pounding as they joined the group outside. The air was thick and cold, and the silence was deafening. The hut stood before them, its walls covered in strange glowing symbols that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. A figure emerged from the shadows of the hut, a tall cloaked being whose face was obscured by a dark hood. Its voice was the same raspy tone they had heard earlier. "Welcome, travelers. You have entered forbidden lands, and for that, there is a price to pay." "What do you mean? We didn't mean to come here," Baba Kamal protested, stepping forward. The bus driver had reappeared from the forest, his face pale but determined. The figure raised a hand, and Baba Kamal was silenced mid-sentence. He clutched his throat, his eyes wide with terror, before falling to his knees. "Speak only when asked," the figure warned, its tone icy. The group huddled together, their fear palpable. "Please," Kendi found herself saying, though her voice was barely a whisper, "we just want to go home." The figure tilted its head as if considering her words. "Home," it repeated. "You seek to return, but not all will make it. A test awaits you." The ground beneath them trembled, and the glowing symbols on the hut began to spread, forming a circle around the group. The forest seemed to close in, the trees pressing closer as the mist thickened. "What kind of test?" Shani asked, her voice shaking. The figure stretched out its arm, pointing to a path that had appeared behind the hut. "You must follow the path and face what lies ahead. Only those with pure hearts and unbroken spirits will find their way out. The rest..." It trailed off, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Without another word, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving the group to decide their fate. "We have no choice," said the elderly woman with the walking stick. "We must go. Standing here will do us no good." Reluctantly, the passengers began walking toward the path. The red glow faded, replaced by an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow everything. Kendi stayed close to Shani, her hand gripping her friend's tightly. The path was narrow, lined with trees that seemed to whisper as they passed. Strange shapes moved in the corners of their vision, but whenever they turned to look, there was nothing there. "I don't like this," Shani muttered, her voice barely audible. "Me neither," Kendi replied, her eyes darting around. The first challenge came without warning. The group entered a clearing where a large, shimmering pool of water blocked their path. The water was black as ink, its surface reflecting the stars above. "What now?" a man asked, looking around nervously. From the pool, a voice echoed, soft and melodic, but with an edge that made Kendi shiver. "Step into the water, but beware, only truth will keep you afloat. Lies will pull you under." The group hesitated. Finally, the young couple stepped forward, holding hands. They walked into the water, and to everyone's amazement, they stayed afloat, their feet barely skimming the surface. "It's safe," the man called back, relief in his voice. One by one, the others followed. Kendi and Shani were among the last. As Kendi stepped into the pool, a strange warmth spread through her, and she felt a tug deep within her chest. Memories flashed before her, moments she had lied, even small ones, and guilt began to weigh her down. "Kendi!" Shani's voice jolted her back. She realized she had started to sink, the water lapping at her knees. "Tell the truth," Shani urged, gripping her hand. I lied to my grandmother," Kendi blurted out. "I told her I passed my math exam, but I failed." The tugging sensation disappeared, and she rose back to the surface. Shani pulled her forward, and together they made it to the other side. Not everyone was so lucky. 2 passengers had vanished beneath the dark water, their cries echoing briefly before silence returned. The survivors stood on the far side, their faces pale and filled with dread. "This is only the beginning," the elderly woman said, her voice heavy. "We must keep moving." As they continued down the path, the forest grew darker and the challenges more perilous. But one question lingered in Kendi's mind. Who or what was behind this terrifying ordeal? The group continued through the darkened forest, each step heavier than the last. The eerie silence of the night was interrupted only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant growl of an unseen creature. Kendi's mind raced as they trudged forward. Each test they faced seemed to reveal more about their fears, their regrets, and their deepest secrets. But despite the chilling dangers, there was something else, something almost comforting, about the presence of the elderly woman with the walking stick. She spoke little, but her calm strength gave them courage. After what felt like hours of walking, the path before them split into 2 directions, one winding left, the other right. "The road to salvation is not always clear," the elderly woman murmured, her voice low but steady. "We must trust our hearts." "But how do we know which way to go?" Baba Kamau asked, his voice quivering with uncertainty. The wind howled, and the distant sound of drums echoed in the distance, though they could not tell which direction it came from. The group hesitated, unsure of how to move forward. "It's the heart that chooses," the elderly woman said again. "Follow it." Kendi, her heart heavy with doubt but desperate to escape the dark woods, took a deep breath. She stepped forward, her feet instinctively leading her to the right. "We follow her," Shani said firmly, her voice a mixture of fear and hope. One by one, they followed Kendi, though some murmured doubts under their breath. The path narrowed as they moved deeper into the forest. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted again. The air grew thick, and a bright light suddenly blazed in front of them, blinding and intense. For a moment, the group stumbled, disoriented by the overwhelming brightness. When their vision cleared, they found themselves standing at the edge of a wide, shimmering lake, its surface reflecting the pale light of the moon. The water seemed almost inviting. "Step forward," a voice called from across the lake. They turned to find a figure standing on the opposite shore, a tall woman draped in robes of silver and gold. Her eyes glowed faintly, and she smiled serenely as she beckoned them forward. Kendi's heart skipped a beat. The figure looked like something out of a dream, or a vision from the past. "Who are you?" Kendi asked, her voice trembling but full of awe. "I am the guardian of the final test," the figure replied, her voice both gentle and firm. "The journey has brought you here for a reason. You must face the last trial, one that will either free you or bind you to this place forever." The group exchanged nervous glances, but Kendi knew that they had come this far. They had faced their fears, confessed their lies, and walked through the trials that had tested their spirits. "How do we pass?" Shani asked, her eyes wide. The figure smiled again, though it was not a comforting smile. "The final test is one of choice. You must choose who among you will step into the waters and offer themselves to the lake. Only one will make it across." The group froze, the weight of the decision crashing down on them. Who would it be? Who would take the final step and risk everything for the chance to escape? Baba Kamau stepped forward, his face set in determination. "I will do it," he said. "I have lived long, and perhaps it is my time to go." "No!" Kendi cried, her voice desperate. "It should be me. Let us here." But Baba Kamau shook his head gently. "We all have our roles to play. This is mine." Without another word, he stepped into the water. The moment his feet touched the surface, the water swirled around him, and a brilliant light surrounded him. For a moment, it seemed as though he would vanish, but then the light dimmed, and the lake fell silent. When the glow faded, Baba Kamau stood on the opposite shore, his face serene. He had made it. The group rushed to join him, and as they reached the edge of the water, the voice of the guardian echoed in their minds. "You have passed the test. The journey is complete. You are free." And just like that, the forest began to fade, the trees and mist dissolving into the night. The bus, the mysterious figure, and the challenges vanished, leaving only the cool, quiet night behind. The group stood in the middle of an open field, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. They had made it. They were free. "We're back," Shani whispered, staring in awe at the new day beginning. Kendi breathed in deeply, the weight of the past few hours lifting from her chest. They had survived the journey and emerged stronger, their spirits cleansed. The bus had vanished, but the lessons from their trials would stay with them forever. They had faced their fears, their regrets, and had come out the other side with a renewed sense of hope. As they walked into the bright morning, the world around them felt new. The journey had ended, but a new one was beginning, one filled with the promise of change, redemption, and the warmth of a Christmas they would never forget.